International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom for hosting this extremely important and timely panel. And of course, I want to thank everyone here. It's not every Saturday that you wake up and decide, I'm going to spend my entire day listening to forgotten genocides. The case of the Armenian genocide is an example of a living genocide. It is an example of a continuous genocide. And one of the points I will discuss today is the fact that the Armenian genocide is one of the examples of what happens to society, what happens when a genocide continues to be denied. And the impact, the internal impact it has on the population that are victims, but also the global impact and the signal we send to dictators and global leaders who are willing to take these steps against populations in their communities and in their nations. It's also a history of resilience. It's a history of how we have come together to continue to survive. And that is a history we share with our fellow panelists and with everyone else in this room. And it is current. It is happening and continuing to happen today. During this presentation, I will go into the mechanisms of genocide that we have seen, highlight some patterns, not just in the Armenian genocide, but in the case of the Assyrians and Yazidis that we've seen. And look at the present. Talk about the justice, or lack thereof, and build for you the historic background of the Armenian genocide. Oftentimes when we talk about the Armenian genocide, we talk about 1915, and we talk about that as the start. But the reality is, the genocide of the Armenian people dates back to the Hamidian massacres in the mid-1890s under Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who started to perpetrate a genocide against the Armenians, escalating and incriminating Christians within the Ottoman Empire who he felt, or he created the instance of threat. So a threat to his power as a sultan in a time where there was volatility against his empire, which had nothing to do with the Armenians, but again, an empire looking for a scapegoat, looked to the Armenians, looked to the Christian populations, and not just solely the Armenians in some cases, and massacred in the numbers of 100,000 to 300,000 individuals in the Ottoman Empire. So this is where we see the indication of it's okay to kill the Armenians. It's okay to commit these atrocities. And sets the stage for what we see and what we're accustomed to talking about, which is the Armenian genocide in 1915. Again, you're in the Ottoman Empire. This lasts from 1915 to 1923, where you will have 1.5 million Armenians killed. The perpetrators are the Young Turks, the leaders of which are Enver, Talat, and Jamal Pasha. I included Mustafa Kemal Atatürk as well. And historically, he is also included in the vast array of the genocide, because Kemal Atatürk solidifies the end of the genocide. And what we mean by that is, as you come to the end of World War I, as mass atrocities begin to dwindle down, and Atatürk takes over and becomes the democratic leader of the Republic of Turkey, he blockades the border between Turkey and the new Republic of Armenia, intentionally preventing humanitarian aid from coming in and allowing for disease such as dysentery and malaria to kill off all Armenians who come into the country, who take refuge, and who are suffering from disease and other issues coming out of the genocide. The genocide is not recognized by Turkey. The genocide is not recognized by Turkey. It is recognized by 34 different countries, including the United States. And that is a piece of justice we celebrate, but there is so much more that needs to be done outside of recognition. And that is something for all of our communities to consider. What are the steps of reparations that we must take to actually bring justice to our communities? The mechanism of genocide for the Armenians starts First on April 24th, when all of our community leaders, all of the intellectuals are collected and slaughtered in one shot. And that pattern is something we see happening again today. Both my colleagues today on the panel talked about women and rape. And that does not, the Armenian case is not excluded. In the Armenian case, women were tattooed on their faces and on their hands to demarcate that they are Armenian and they are not concubines. They were subjugated to slavery as sex slaves. They were subjected to rape on the death marches, and oftentimes converted to Islam. The children were kidnapped and converted, and oftentimes became house slaves. And death marches, I think we have seen in multiple situations, but in this case, this is through Damascus, Syria. The genocide also sets the precedent of mechanisms for the Holocaust. So for instance, we see the gas chambers that Hitler uses. Prior to that, the Ottoman Turks, there were no mechanisms to create gas. So what they would do is take caves, put people in them, close it with a rock and light a fire, and that gas and inhalation of fire would create the same effect. And the Germans, of course, the German gendarmes being protectors and allies with Turkey, learned these mechanisms and perfected them, so to say, during the Holocaust. In the case of the Armenian genocide, it is also a history of resilience. And that resilience, a result of that resilience is me standing here speaking to you today. My grandfather and my great-grandparents are survivors of the Armenian genocide. And we have grown up with the stories of them telling us, or repeating through our parents, what it took to escape Ottoman Turkey, but what they left behind as well. The resilience, the result of the resilience is the MRI machine. And people who left the genocide and decided to do more and give back to society. And I reference the MRI machine because the inventor of the MRI is an Armenian. There was a rescue or a humanitarian attempt during a humanitarian project during the Armenian genocide that was called the Near East Relief. The Near East Relief came to the aid of Armenians, creating missions throughout the Ottoman Empire, created orphanages in Lebanon, and created the orphanage that you see in front of you in Alexandropol, which is currently in Armenia, in the current city of Gyumri, the second largest city in Armenia. And saving hundreds of thousands of Armenian orphans, they were able to teach them trades, from sewing to carpentry, so that these individuals had a mechanism of survival. And as you can see, there was a campaign in the United States to encourage fundraising, and there used to be a saying, I believe still in the 1920s and 1930s, to children in dinner, when they wouldn't finish their dinner, finish your dinner and remember the starving Armenians. And so we became a part of America, we became a part of the American fabric. Not just from this aid program, but as we immigrated here into the United States. But to the psychological effect of the genocide, it took decades for individuals who were survivors to begin talking about what had happened. And in those decades, Turkey became stronger. In those decades, Turkey continued to get away with what they had committed, genocide. In those decades, as Armenians were trying to revive themselves and figure out what had just happened to them, the Holocaust occurred. And so the impact we still feel today. And we still feel it because given the denial of the genocide, it has continued on with Turkey's cousin, Azerbaijan. In 1988, Armenians living in Baku, in Sumgait, and in other cities in Azerbaijan, which is a cousin country to Turkey, were massacred. This indication and ignition of hatred and massacre of Armenians in Azerbaijan took time. It took time to fester hatred towards the Armenians. Two populations were living somewhat harmoniously together, Armenians and Azerbaijanis. But Azerbaijan began a trend, in Soviet Azerbaijan, began a trend of dehumanization. Something we later will see in Rwanda. Over the radio airwaves, started to talk about how Armenians are dogs. They're infidels. And started to beat down on the relationship between neighbors, to the point where when you get to the pinnacle in February of 1988, neighbors go into neighbors' homes and throw them out of the window. Pregnant women are raped in the middle of streets in Baku. Officers walk up to women and slash their bellies open. And you see a redundancy of what you saw in the Ottoman Empire in 1988. Almost 70 years later, you see it happening in Baku. You see it happening in Sungay. You see it happening to the Christian Armenians in Azerbaijan. And as an effect, the Armenians decide we need to protect ourselves. So then this is where we get to the Republic of Artsakh and the genocide that is continuing on today. And I'm actually going to step away from the podium, and I think you can still hear me. But to give you an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about Artsakh, and I'm going to refer to it as Artsakh because that is the Armenian name, and part of genocide is cultural erasure. And cultural erasure, referring to it as Nagorno-Karabakh, for me, is not referring to it in its appropriate name, which is Artsakh, because this is an Armenian land. This is the Republic of Armenia. And in 1918, this was whole. But in 1921, Stalin carves up, gerrymanders, if you will, this map, taking this region of Nakhichevan, which was ethnically Armenian, and putting it in Azerbaijan. In 1921, creates Azerbaijan, which before this did not exist as a nation, and takes the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, as we say, Artsakh, and makes it an independent oblast, because it is 98% populated with Christian Armenians. Ethnic Armenians who have lived here, who have monasteries from the 4th century in this portion of Armenia. And he takes it and makes it an independent oblast. And the reason he makes it an independent oblast is because it is impossible, even in Stalin's mind then, to see this population of Armenians ruled by the Azerbaijanis, who are again cousins to Turkey, who are just coming off of massacres and genocide of the Armenians in Ottoman Turkey. But Nakhichevan does become a part of Azerbaijan, which is probably the weirdest, as you can tell, because Armenia is right in the middle. And all the ethnic Armenians in Nakhichevan are ethnically cleansed. By 1965, they're gone. And any remnants, any relics, any gravestones, any historical indications of Christianity, like khachkars, which are cross stones, very intricately carved, are absolutely and utterly gone by 2001, with a quick bombing of all of them to destruct them, which was all captured from the Iranian border. The region of Artsakh has been under siege in the last few years. When the attacks happened in 1988 in Baku, the people of Artsakh said, all right, we're not going to be able to freely live under Azerbaijan. And if the Soviet Union crashes and they integrate us in, we will die. And that's exactly why they had democratic referendum to reunite with Armenia, which is how they started. And when that passed, the USSR said, nah, we don't like it. So they had a second referendum and said, fine, if we can't be reunited with our home country, we will be independent, but we will not be ruled by Azerbaijan. That angered Azerbaijan. As you can tell, they were already angry in Baku. massacring over 100,000 to 200,000 Armenians out of their cities. And so they took, and Azerbaijan waged war on this enclave. And against all odds, the Armenians won. 6 years of bloodshed. But the Armenians defended their right to independence, to freedom of religion, and to every right we fight for here in the US for our freedoms. All of that was taken away from them in 2020. In 2020, Azerbaijan, with the assistance of Turkey, waged a full-fledged war against the people, the peaceful people of Artsakh. And so continued the cultural erasure. In the Ottoman Empire, there's a city called, in the Ottoman Empire, there were thousands upon thousands of Christian churches. In one city called Ani, and if anyone have Armenian friends, Ani is one of the most common names. Ani was the city of 1,001 churches. Today, not a single church remains. They've been converted to mosques, they have been used as barns, they have been desecrated. And that pattern continues in 2020. This is Ghazan Chechotz. This is a 17th century monastery, one of the only monasteries that has a basement facility, so when a priest needs to give confession before he comes onto the altar, he can give it and have the echo of God's voice come back to him. It is one of the most holy experiences you can have. And you can see the intentional bombing from the rooftop of that church from this photo. And you can see in this photo that today this has been converted to a mosque. This is Amaras. This has been captured as of this week. And Amaras is a 4th century monastery, and we have absolutely no faith that this will be kept in its entirety. Azerbaijan has done everything in its power, and by power I mean its petrol dollars, to erase Armenian history and to rewrite it. They have gone to commissions to say Armenia is not the first Christian nation, it is the Albanians. And Ghazan Chechotz is not an Armenian church, it is Albanian. We are restoring it to its roots. Instead, they restored a mosque. The 2020 war has a grave number of war crimes and things we have seen as a pattern in previous genocides. But the difference is, in these photos, I can show you black and whites of dead bodies, of grave sites. Today, if I showed you what we have seen on social media of what the Azerbaijani military and militia have done to the civilians and soldiers equally, you won't survive to lunch. And you certainly will not continue to have breakfast. So I decided to instead include one of the pieces of coverage from Amnesty International to exemplify the inhumanity and dehumanization that continued. The beheading of civilians and putting their heads on pigs. The rape and killing of female soldiers in Armenia, and then decapitating the body, gouging out the eyes, and putting in place of them rocks, and taking video of that and sending it to her children, and then putting it all over the internet. Today's genocide is captured real time, is disseminated real time, and our government is still not acting against it. We have yet to have justice for what has occurred to us in the past, but right now we are fighting for survival for what is happening to us in this minute. Azerbaijan attacked the people of Artsakh on September 19th, 4 days ago. And the people who remained in Artsakh after the 2020 war are now in bomb shelters, crowded around each other, and fighting for their survival. The genocide of the Armenian people is continuing this minute. And every second that I am here, there is some type of negotiation happening, and whether these individuals will safely leave. Azerbaijan is not agreeing to a humanitarian corridor without conditions. It is demanding integration. It is demanding a kill list of 400 individuals they have identified that they want, which may or may not include American citizens. They have, at every step of the way that the US is trying to create negotiation processes, only negotiated on their terms. For the last 282 days, or 282 before September 19th, they blockaded Armenia, Artsakh. The one corridor that you see that connects Lachin between Armenia and Artsakh, they blockaded, not allowing any assistance to come in. Previously, 400 tons of food and medical supply would come in from Armenia into Artsakh. Zero. People were famished on September 19th. People couldn't even get 200 grams of bread, which is half a loaf, for an entire family. They have no artillery, they have no medication, and then they were attacked. Brutally, and in the middle of the day, at 1 p.m. when children were at school. Today, mothers still cannot find their children. They don't know if they're under rubble, they don't know if they're in the bomb shelter, they don't know if they're alive. They've posted photos of them, and the Azeris have taken those photos and said, kill this child if you see them. And these are the photos of those children. These are the photos of mothers who just gave birth during the bombings, whose lives are at risk, and we don't know whether they or their children will survive in the next few days. And we don't know whether we'll get medical supplies in to rescue them. So I ask you this. It is happening today, and we are doing everything that we can to prevent this from further affecting our community. We are a diaspora. We feel we are a strong diaspora. But we cannot do this alone, and we cannot do it with everyone, without everyone's voice with us. So I ask you today, at some point, to take out your phones and take action. ANCA.org/alert. To tell the administration, to tell our elected officials that we need to sanction Azerbaijan, that we need to sanction the perpetrators and never allow for this to happen again. And this, I leave you with, is the Stepanakert airport, the capital of Artsakh. These are over 10,000 refugees now who are waiting there to see if there will be a humanitarian corridor for them to leave. And we have no indication that that will be the case. Thank you.